What is going on, beautiful people? I hope you are having an amazing day. Welcome back to another episode of the Thrive Forever Fit Show. I'm your host, Jay Nixon. And if you know anything about me or you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you know that my goal is to help you live your happiest, healthiest life while on the quest to cure obesity. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I am immensely grateful that you spend your time listening to me rant and ramble about all things health, wellness, abundance, and opportunity. It absolutely means the world to me. Today's episode is sponsored by my brand new weight loss transformation program called Flex. Flex stands for a flexible lifestyle eating and exercise program. And my promise is this: it will be the last program you ever need to purchase. It is a weight loss program that is not a diet. I know that just blew your mind. This is not a diet. There's no pills, potions, or false promises that you have to purchase. There's no fad, no covers of magazines, no doctors in lab coats. This is real deal lifestyle transformation that is going to change your life forever. You will never need to do another diet. You're going to get expert level support and accountability. You're going to get transformative information about how to eat, when to eat, what to eat. There's 3 reasons that people struggle with weight loss. It's too much, too often, or the wrong combination. They're either eating too much food, too often, or they're eating the wrong combinations. And I'm going to help you fix all 3 of those. Thousands of people just like you have ditched the depressive diet roller coaster, have come on board with the Thrive Forever Fit Flex program and are transforming their lives. We've got clients that have lost 10 pounds in the first 7 days, 15 pounds, 20 pounds. We've got clients that are over 130 pounds down. Guys, I promise you, this is the last program you'll ever need to purchase. And I am more than honored to offer it to you so that I can help you on your journey. All right, let's get to the show. Dr. Aslie, welcome to the show, man. I am so excited to talk to you. We did a little bit of just a chat session before I hit record, and I'm already got goosebumps and super intrigued. So before we jump into, corporate spine and the medical world and in general, tell me a little bit about you. Like, how'd you get to where you are today?
First, I would like to thank you for giving me a chance to come and actually talk about this topic. So yeah. I really appreciate that.
For sure.
Right. And I'm an orthopedic spine surgeon. So that means that there's 2 ways of becoming a spine surgeon. One is through neurosurgery, which is brain surgery. The other one is through orthopedic surgery. So I finished medical school in 1994. I went to Berkeley undergrad, double majored in physiology and genetics. Then I went to medical school in New York Medical College. I graduated in 1994. Then I did my residency in orthopedic surgery. And I finished in 2001 in a hospital called St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan, New York. And then I did a year of fellowship in spine surgery at Brigham and Women's Beth Israel Hospital, part of Harvard University. And after I finished, because I'm from Northern California, my mother lives in Berkeley, I moved to Sacramento, and I've been in practice in the Sacramento area since 2002. So more than almost coming up to 21 years.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's my story.
That's awesome. Did you always know you wanted to be a doctor? Were you always captivated by the body or medicine, or what kind of drove you that direction?
I was. My dad was a physician, and I was very close to my dad. Even though my mom and dad were divorced, but I was very close to my dad. And my dad was a very good student. He was #1 in his class, in University of Tehran. And he would always tell me the stories about his medical school and his practice or so. And he was a city coroner as well. So he had a private practice in the city coroner. So at the age of 6, 7, I remember I would go to investigations with him. And I would see, victims or so. So I always wanted to be a doctor. I wasn't sure what type of a doctor till medical school. And then this is a kind of an interesting story. When I finished medical school, I was dead set on being a cardiac surgeon. I wanted to be a heart surgeon. So actually, I finished my medical school in 1994, and I got into residency to become a heart surgeon. The problem is the first year, literally the end of my internship year, the companies came out with a stent. Stent is a little spring that you put in the coronaries and keep it open. And you can do that very minimally invasively with a little stab in the groin. So the second I saw that, I was like, uh-oh.
Right.
The alternative for open heart surgery, open the chest and doing all that surgery through a small stab. I said, technology favors invasive cardiology as opposed to open heart. So I got to get out of this.
Right.
And I threw myself into fire. Switching residency is extremely hard, but I was able to switch my residency and got into orthopedic surgery. And then I decided to become a spine surgeon, and I did a fellowship, and here I am. So I always wanted to be a doctor. And, I got to tell you, I landed in a job that I was born to do in a way. For some reason, I was very good in terms of diagnosing spine and we'll talk about my inventions or so later, but it's been really just a fantastic thing of landing here as a spine surgeon.
Yeah, that's so fast. I'm fascinated, much like you, with the human body, and I spent most of my earlier life in the medical space, working in hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, clinical research companies. So anytime I get to talk to a doctor, I'm probably a rare human that can look at a clinical study and actually know what to look at, where to look first, what makes sense, like who funded the study, like why was, you know what I mean? Like, so I always tell people, they're like, hey, Jay, I saw this study. And I'm like, yep, let's pause really quick. Is it a study? What kind of study is it? And most importantly, who paid for the study? Because until we establish that, then the information that we're about to receive could be, and I hate to use the word, but it could be biased, or it could be adjusted in the terms of what that, the payer of wanted to see. And so I actually left the pharmaceutical world for what I believed at the time. I was young. I was in my 20s, or actually just the end of 20s, early 30s, of just something I didn't feel comfortable with doing on a daily basis. I was selling a drug, which you're probably familiar with, called Advair. And Advair came out, and I remember the day it came out, and it was established with a black box warning. For anybody who's not listening, anytime a drug has a black box warning, it basically means that, death is a intimate, possibility for a certain subset of the population. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. They're going to call us all into a meeting and explain this and say, hey, be careful when you're talking to the doc, like this is the population they need to be controlled of, blah, blah, blah. They brought thousands of us into an auditorium, as they always do in the pharmaceutical world. And they taught us for 3 days how to avoid the question of the black box warning, how to sell around the black box warning, how to not have that come up in conversation. And I just remember sitting in the audience thinking, or sitting, they're thinking as a pharmaceutical rep, I'm like, gosh, I don't feel comfortable with that. Like, that's not ethically something that I'm comfortable with. And so that was kind of the start of my divergence from the pharmaceutical world. And, that's where I land today as a nutritionist and somebody who helps people on the kind of the other side of the game. But yeah, let's jump in. So this book, Corporate Spine, has me massively captivated. I'm a science nerd. I love anything to do with research and data. What was the tipping point when you knew there was a situation in your industry that you had to address?
Well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I was, when I explained in my book that it was one comment that kind of changed my life. One of the surgeons in San Francisco, I practice in a small town. And the glory of being a medical practice is that you practice for, you take care of important people, and you practice in a large city. You are a doctor for celebrities or so and so, So the doctors in a small town, they don't get credit. They get, it's like nobody wants to listen to them. Right. So when I finished my practice, my education, and I've done really well. I did very well. I have very good scores in my test. In the first 2 years of medical school, I was ranked number 1 in my class. But when I looked for jobs, there was no jobs around San Francisco area or so. And this group was recruiting in Yuba City, California. So I went there. And, but of course, always the question is, are you okay in a small town? Well, one of the surgeons in San Francisco, which patients that I was seeing, made this comment to the patient that, look, you either get your surgery done in Yuba City or you get it done right. And that comment just burned me. And I said, okay,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to start research and development. I got to show that, even though I'm in a small town, actually looking back, practicing in a small town was actually the best thing ever happened to me. Why? Because in a large city, you never see your patients. They come in, you see them for 10 minutes, and that's it. A lot of times, actually, these successful busy surgeons, they have PAs.
Right.
So they don't even see the patient. The PA kind of manages them, and then that's it. There was a surgeon, there was a patient I saw in Reno. He was telling me, if you put my surgeon in a lineup, I cannot tell you who he is. And he just said, I just saw him for 10 minutes before the surgery, and that was it. I never saw him again. So, but being in a small town, I always run into my patients in the store there. The cousin of the patient was a neighbor of my office manager or something. So I always knew how my patients were doing. And that's so important in the world of spine surgery. What are we doing to our patients? You go to conferences, you learn certain stuff, and then you come back and do that surgery. But then what does that surgery do to the patient?
Right.
So that was very key being in a small town to develop that wealth of knowledge. Well, when this happened, I knew that with the world of spine surgery, we have a problem. The problem is the bone quality. When we get older, the current instruments that we use, they become very ineffective. Let me show you. What we use for immobilization of a spine is a large screw called pedicle screw. You insert this into the vertebrae. I have a model of it. And each screw has a tulip on the other end that can accept the rod. So if you want to fuse 4 or 5 vertebrae together, you put screws on both sides. It's called pedicle screws, and then you connect them with a rod, and that way you immobilize the vertebrae, hoping that they will fuse together. Well, in the elderly population, we have a very bad problem because these screws get inserted into the bone, and the bone, vertebral bone, is not a solid block of bone. It's not wood. It's like a shoebox. Outside bone is very tough, what we call cortical bone, but the inside bone is a spongy bone we call cancellous bone, which with aging, it just kind of sometimes melts away in a way. So screws become very ineffective. So I wanted to invent something to oppose that. Well, the device that I invented is this right here. It's a flat plate that sits against the lamina. Lamina is a cortical bone and uses composite straps to wrap around the lamina. And there's a built-in clamp at the base, which you tie it like a zip tie, you tension it, and then there's a screw at the base that you turn it, and that clamps the strap. So it holds onto the vertebrae without penetrating it. I presented this device to Congress of Neurological Surgeons, and I won the Innovations Showcase in Congress of Neurological Surgeons in 2015. So I'm legit.
That's all. That is awesome. I want to ask you a quick question. This always comes to my brain because when I think about surgery, it's always scary no matter what the surgery is on, right? Like whether it's your foot or your knee. I've had knee surgery, hand surgery, you name it. But spine surgery kind of carries a different. This is from an outside perspective. I want to get it from the inside, from the players, the guy who's actually doing the surgery. It seems that it carries like a more like, I don't even know if it's dangerous mystique. Like you always hear like, oh my gosh, like, once you have spine surgery, you'll never be the same. Or, oh my gosh, it's, don't have that spine surgery unless you absolutely have to. But if it's like a knee, if it's a knee, people are like, oh my gosh, go get it fixed and you'll be perfect, or a shoulder or anything. Is it like that on your side of the game as well? And why is that?
No, absolutely is like that. As a matter of fact, I'm very different than some of the other surgeons. I talk my patients out of surgery. But one reason that I wrote this book is because I really think spine surgeons have done themselves a favor of educating public of what we go through
Right.
to improve the image of spine surgery so they understand what we're dealing with. But to make it easier, I divide my patients into two categories, simple and complex. Simple if they have one or two discs that are affected in terms of damage that causing the pain. Complex if they have three or more discs that they look damaged, and each one of them could be the source of the pain. So why is that? Well, in a simple patients, the problem is localized. In a complex patient, the problem is regional. So it's like it spans an area. Well, the surgery actually does very well if you have a localized problem. It's the complex patients that the outcome is very unpredictable. Now, when you have that sort of a patient, you have patients that they have a bunch of discs that are not looking good, we don't have a study to tell us where the pain exactly coming from. So if a patient comes to you and says, hey, I have back pain, and you get an MRI, and you have 4 discs that are bad, well, what you're going to do, you don't want to do a surgery and patient comes out on the other end and say, hey, I'm not better. Nobody wants that.
Right.
So what you're going to do, you're going to fix all of the problems that can potentially cause the pain. So the patient gets 4-level fusion. If you have 5 discs that can potentially cause pain, you get 5-level fusion. Well, when you do that, the surgery itself causes a problem. How?
Yeah.
Well, I always tell my patients, look, if you have no problem, we do this surgery to you, you will end up in problem. So the question is, well, why do you do these surgeries? This is why. Because the pain that you have before surgery is so severe, like a sharp stabbing pain, like somebody put a knife in your back, and it's intolerable. You replace that with a pain that is naggy, achy, and you take a pill here and there, you rub it, and you can control it. And that's why we do the surgery. So the patient needs to understand that. Or a lot of times you have to tell the patient, you make them understand that, look, the best benefit of the surgery, sometimes you might not even see, which is stopping you from getting worse.
Gotcha.
So those are the things that you have to tell the patient. So in the simple patients, I tell them, look, try these and this, therapy, injections. Then if you want surgery, we can proceed with surgery. In the complex patients, I tell them, look, do whatever you can not to get surgery. But you've come to a point you can't live like this, then we're going to have to do surgery, and what comes after, it is what it is. And these are the patients that they have problems, they have to take them back to surgery, then they have what we call junctional problem. If you fuse 4 levels, then the level above it is under tremendous stress. So they can come back 2 years later, 3 years later, and then on and on and on and on, keep going up the spine until the whole spine
This is a big question, Doc, and it might not even be answerable. Whenever you hear about somebody with a disc problem or a back problem, is there a percentage of those or a ratio that are, injury based, degenerative based on just how they're built and how they were born? Like, what are because you always hear about, people with back problems. I've always had a bad back or blah, blah, blah. Like, what's the normal causative nature for somebody to have a disc issue? Is there one?
Well, the question that you asked, we don't have an answer.
Okay.
And one thing I need to explain to patients who understand is that spine surgery is a very young field. We really, if you think about it, some people might argue we've been doing spine surgery since 50s or so, but we really didn't understand spine till invention of MRI. MRI was the one that was a test that we could see the discs and see what's happening to them. And first MRI was available in 1985. So, well, let's say the first MRIs were not good quality. So it takes 10 years to get good quality, and then another 10 years to kind of get spread all over the United States. Not all the hospitals are going to get it at the same time. So I would say probably it was 1995 that we started really seeing these and treating patients. So from 1995 till now, that doesn't give us much time to really study this very complex problem. So that's one thing that people need to understand. 2, let me explain to you in 20 years of practice what I've learned about back pain. I always tell my patients that the disc is a complex structure, has two components. The middle part, which is a mushy gelatinous material, and a tough ring around that called annulus fibrosus. So if a patient goes through, and it's always trauma, always something. Why? Because, well, we don't fall off the truck all the time, or some accident happened. No, but all day we're doing stuff. We're lifting stuff. We're doing work. So it could be a moderate amount of trauma, but it's always a trauma. Something happens to that disc that it gets injured. When it gets injured, the injury itself doesn't equate to pain. Injury plus inflammation equals to pain. That is the very important concept that patients need to understand. Why? Because it's not the damage that causes the pain, it's the body's attempt to repair the damage that causes the pain. And unfortunately, because there's gravity, body doesn't have a good system to repair damage, because to really repair the damage, become efficient, you have to suspend the patient in the air. So to eliminate the gravity, as long as gravity is kind of pushing and yanking on the disc, body cannot repair it. So the repair mechanism becomes the problem. And that's why one of the things that we do steroid injections with the procedure. What is a steroid? Steroid is nothing but an anti-inflammatory. And we know that a good chunk of the time it works. The problem with spine surgery, one of the biggest problems with spine surgery, is that everybody is different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like back pain is not like something like a blood pressure, that it's what we call the bell-shaped curve. The normal is in the middle, and then you can be a little bit on the other side of the normal. Blood sugar, we know what normal is. Spine surgery is not like that. The back pain is a flat distribution among the population, means that everybody's different.
Right.
That's good and bad. Bad because when the patient comes in, they have two questions: how bad is my situation? Basically, what's going to happen to me?
Right.
And only thing I can tell the patient, I have no idea. Whatever scenario you can think of happening to you, I've seen it happen. We have to take one day at a time and just treat whatever you have at that day, basically. So those things make treating back pain very difficult. But the most important thing that patient needs to understand is that we don't have a way to see that inflammation. Right. So a patient comes in, their whole back is good except one disc. That's easy. Okay, that's the problem. So if you fuse that disc, do surgery on that disc, you're going to get better. The problem is some patients come in and they have 3 discs that are not looking good. Well, there's no way of knowing which one is the one that's causing the pain. We don't have that test. So majority of the time, based on what we do these days, patient in a way gets a surgery that they don't need. I call it shotgun surgery, so if 3 discs that are bad, you get a 3-level fusion. 4 discs, you get 4-level fusion. So that's the unfortunate problem. Now, throughout the years, because I'm so close to my patients, I've seen, I don't have a PA. I've never had a PA. Because I'm not against having a PA. Every time I'm in the office, I think about hiring one. But when you have a PA, then you stop seeing patients. You stop learning.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
You end up doing same thing over and over and over. You don't progress as a surgeon. So I can say that with confidence that I've progressed through my practice, and I've learned that every time patient comes in and says, hey, I have this and that, everything's a clue. I can somehow, I'm not saying I can't, somehow I can figure out which disc hurts more than the other one. And that's the direction that we have to go as a specialty, and we're not. Because nobody, the industry is not promoting smaller surgeries. The industry promoting big surgeries.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It seems like it's a rush to surgery as opposed to as kind of like a communicative thing like you're doing. You seem like you're trying to get as much information as you can, and then surgery is the last stage, I mean, obviously there's critical conditions that probably need to, expedite that. But for the average patient, like there needs to be a lot of communication. I deal with a lot of like people with weight conditions, people who are overweight. And they always say, hey, oh my gosh, my knees, my feet, my ankles, some of them, say low back, hips, spine, the whole 9 yards. Is there a direct correlation with, or that you've seen in your particular practice, with someone who maybe has some back pain, gets healthier through some lifestyle modifications first, loses some weight, and the back pain gets better? Or is there any correlation with that at all? Just, I'm thinking from a pressure perspective, you know what I mean? Like somebody who's 100 pounds overweight is definitely going to put more pressure on their knees than somebody who's not 100 pounds overweight. Is it the same thing with the spine?
Oh, absolutely. But the thing is that there's really, it's not like everybody that comes to my office are obese. No.
I mean, this is a very subset of a population.
Right. So I have patients that are skinny, and they have a bad back. I have, of course, patients that are large. But you're right. The more weight, those discs, a disc basically holding your body. All that upper weight and whatever you're lifting goes right through that disc. The disc doesn't share the weight with any other structure.
Okay.
So more weight, you're thinking that probably that disc is going to wear out faster. And there's another thing that I tell my patients. Let's say you have, in simple physics, let's say you have extra 1 pound in your gut. Spine is like a flagpole, so have to stay straight, right? So flagpole, basically, you have these wires pulling from different, and they have to, for the flag to stay upright, they have to cancel each other, right? So that's how it is in spine. Let's say you have extra 1 pound in your belly, then guess what? Then the back muscles have to pull you down with the same amount of force. Well, guess what? Both the weight and the pull from the spine, they both pull down on the spine. So I tell my patients, I say, if you lose 1 pound in your gut, you actually take 2, sometimes 3 pounds pressure off your spine. So weight control is very important. The problem is that every time I have a patient that are heavy, it's very difficult to talk about weight. Why? Because they've already talked about, they know what they've already tried different things.
It's not a surprise, right? They're not going to be shocked by your statement. That was just more from a pressure perspective, because you always hear about it with knees, right? People, I've talked to a lot of knee surgeons, and they're like, somebody who's overweight, you kind of gave the same pressure scenario. Like for every 1 pound you're overweight, it's an extra blank amount of pressure on your knees. And if you lose weight, maybe you could, prolong the necessity of having a knee replacement. I just wanted to see if, from your perspective, if the spine was kind of, and that makes sense, the way it's pulling the spine, down and back a little bit, to overcompensate for the forward weight makes massive sense. When did you realize, just shifting gears a little bit, when did you, I mean, obviously you understand the mechanical nature of the spine, but this screw situation, right? We're putting basically a screw into a soft piece of material. And I think I'm not a handyman at all, but I can tell you, if I put a screw into my sheetrock and there's no anchor to it, and I put 100-pound painting on it, that painting is going to end up on the ground. There's going to be a giant hole in the wall. And it sounds to me like, from a layman's perspective, that's exactly what we're doing with a spine surgery. We're putting, basically a wood screw into sheetrock that has no structure to be able to hold that screw. Why did that start, and why is it continuing? Right? Just because from this side of the microphone, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, okay, there's got to be and you've already figured out the better way. But why are people still using that old archaic way if it doesn't work?
Well, that's the whole
Here we go, right?
usage. Here we go. That's what I've been working on for the last 7 years, and it really took me 4 or 5 years to come up with an answer. And I do have an answer for that. And but it came with years of talking to the professors, chasing them, talking to them, and every time I talk about this topic, they want to kill me. They just want to rip me apart. Now, this is what happened. So after I developed my device, I had some problems. So I said, you know what, let me look at the screws, see if they have those problems or how they solved it. And I found that the screw has the same problem. So I said, well, let me look into the literature a little bit more detail, see what's going on. And that's when I was shocked. I mean, it was what I found out in the papers. It was just flat out shocking. What I found out was that there was only one paper written by one man named Dr. Zdeblek that published in 1993 that said these screws work beautifully. I mean, they're just better than, whatever you've ever had in your life. But there were 6 multinational, multi-center papers came up between 1997 and 2003 that said these screws don't work. They don't increase fusion rate. They don't improve outcome. So I said, what is going on? Let me take a look at that paper in 1993. Let's dig deeper. Let's read it. The first thing that I noticed, it was, let me tell you this. Every time I thought that things cannot get worse, it got 10 times worse. And then when I thought that, oh my God, this is bad, then it get 10 times. I mean, it's like just runaway train. That's like, oh my God, this is like a complete train wreck. So I looked at the paper and I realized it says preliminary report. I spent 2 years to look for the final report. Eventually, I talked to one of the professors from one of these Midwestern universities, and he said, yeah, that is all we have. That study was abandoned in the middle, was never finished. I was like, what?
Right.
If you Google right now, Zdeblek spine fusion, that article would come up. You will see that it was published in 1993 as a preliminary report, and you will see that was referenced by 1,122 articles as of last week. So this paper is the most referenced paper in the entire world of spine surgery. How is that? How do you explain a preliminary report that was never finished is the quintessential anchor for an entire specialty? Well, I had to do a little bit more research. I said, let's do research about Dr. Zdeblek. And everything that I'm saying is in Google. It's not some conspiracy theory. So when these screws came out in 1990s, late 1980s, there were a lot of lawsuits against. There were a lot of bad results. So at some point, there were 7,000 lawsuits against the manufacturer, a company called Medtronic. Not only the lawyers sued the manufacturer, but they sued the surgeons too.
Yeah.
There were 500 lawsuits against North American Spine Society and American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. So in 1993, when this paper published, the world of spine surgery was going through a severe trauma. There were investigations by the United States Senate into this thing. I mean, these famous surgeons had to go testify in Congress. So when he published in 1993 that paper, by 1996, these lawsuits starts disappearing because of his paper.
Yeah.
Guess what? Right around the same time the lawsuits was disappearing, he started getting paid by the company. So by 2004, Dr. Zdeblek has gotten paid $34 million that we know of. $34 million, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, that's bad. But wait, it gets 10 times worse. So by 2004, early 2000s, Medtronic put him in charge, Dr. Zdeblek, in charge of another important study, a product called BMP, bone morphogenic protein, which is a substitute for bone graft. Now, I need to explain something first. The surgeries that we do, we call it fusion surgery. If the disc is gone, we try to tend to fuse the 2 vertebrae, eliminating motion, therefore eliminating pain. The way to do the surgery is that you go down, dissect the bone, you expose the bone, then you put some bone chips that you harvest from somewhere else between the 2 bones, hoping that those bone chips will turn into a solid bone. Well, sometimes it doesn't happen. We call it non-union, and that's a terrible outcome. Basically, your surgery failed. So you have to redo the same surgery. Well, to increase the fusion rate, they came up with screws. And we started using screws. That's the reason we started using these screws. And that's when all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they put him in charge in 2004. They put him in charge of another study called BMP. Well, there was an investigation by United States Senate. It was the conclusion of the United States Senate that paper he published in 2004 was not written by him, was written by the company.
Sure.
Is that that's just crazy? So if that happened, you know, when something like this, somebody gets discredited, it immediately discredits the papers before that.
Yeah,
Right.
everything.
So if you follow that, there's really no paper that said these screws work. All the paper says that the screws don't work.
Right.
Do not increase fusion, and do not improve. So what is going on? I had to investigate this. And it took me 3 years to understand that. First, I said, I got to sit down and write biomechanics first of all, because nobody ever done that. They just put these screws and that's it. Nobody sat down and say, how do these screws fail? What are the forces? And it was very, when I discovered this and I explained to people, they're like, that's like 5th grade physics.
Yeah.
That's so simple. I'm like, yeah, it's a 5th grade physics when you decipher this.
Right.
But it took me 5 years to decipher this. And this is how it goes. When you put these screws in, spine is upright. So the screws are perpendicular to that. So the screws are parallel to the floor in a way.
Right.
Well, guess what? The motion of the vertebrae, the motion of the backbone is not a sliding motion. It doesn't slide back and forth. It doesn't go up and down. It rotates. Every vertebrae rotates through the axis, through the middle of that disc. That means that the motion, the way that these screws fail is toggle, not pull out. Because when you rotate, it's not an even distribution of the force. There's a pressure points.
Right.
So once that point fails, the screw, which is the farthest point from the axis of rotation, once that bone fails, it fails like a zipper. So wait a minute, you tell the screw to do something that it was not made for, you give them nothing but spongy bone. When the screws fail, you look the other way. That's just crazy. So trust me, the biggest question probably patients will ask, like, well, have you brought this up? Absolutely. I am not a keyboard warrior. I go to these conferences, get up and talk about this. But you want to hear something funny? I'll tell you a story that happened to me, what I'm dealing with. In 2016, I was in North American Spine Society, and I got up. At that time, I didn't know what I know now. So I was just starting to ask questions. So I got up and I said, in front of 1,000 spine surgeons, I said, there are all these papers that said these screws don't work. What is going on? Well, the surgeon on the panel, and I didn't want to get in a fight because, every time I question screws, they want to kill me because they went through a lot of trauma in 1990s, So the professor in the panel said, well, we did some studies later and we found that they work great. I'm like, I didn't ask him, like, well, why didn't you publish that? So anyways, 20 minutes later, I was in line to get coffee. I was talking to a representative from the company, and we were just kind of talking back and forth. He introduced me to a guy behind me, a surgeon behind me. He was a very well-known surgeon. He said, oh, Dr. Aslie doesn't like the screws. And he turned around and said, oh, you're the gentleman that made that comment about the screws. Well, I just want to say that, everybody's welcome for their opinion, but you're very wrong. I said, it's not about me. It's about research.
Right.
If the research says that this doesn't work, maybe, just maybe they're trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
He said, I know. I published those papers. Those are my patients. I'm like, yeah? Well, what's your name? He told me his name. And I had the papers in my hand. Yes, he was the 5th author of the 2nd paper that I had in my hand. He said, see, that's my name. That's my paper. I'm like, well, let's read your paper. The last sentence in the paper said, word for word, according to current data, we do not recommend routine use of screws in lumbar fusions. He looked at it and said, that's wrong, and he walked away.
But it's your paper. What do you mean it's wrong?
He did not write the paper. He was
that's my point.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that that's what I'm dealing with. So I had to ask myself a question. What the heck is going on? I mean, I was like, wait a minute, are we like have some sort of a background thing going on with these professors and the companies?
Right.
They're like something like, some conspiracy theories. Are we crooks? I mean, we become surgeons and become crooks, and it took me 3 years to find the answer. And this is the answer. And I don't want to say this, but this is answer, that I think is the answer. We became orthopedic surgeons first. So we do 5 years of orthopedic surgery. And in that 5 years, the exposure to spine is very minimal, very minimal. The biggest exposure is fracture fixation. We're constantly taking call in the emergency room with the broken bones. And so trauma is the main exposure that we get. And then we do 1 year of spine surgery, 1 year, that's it. 1 year, and we call ourselves spine surgeons. So this is what happened. In 1960s, we came out with a concept, what we call rigid fixation. We figured out that if you put plates and screws in the fracture ends and hold them together in a rigid fashion, that's how the bone healed very well, and it worked beautifully. Before that, we used to cast the patient, or like there was deformity, there was this, that. But once you start doing those surgery using screws and rods, with a concept called rigid fixation, it was a turning point for orthopedic surgery. Well, guess what? So they beat it into your head that the rigid fixation is the answer for bone to heal. So by 1985 or late 80s, when these screws appeared, we were like, aha, that's what we've been waiting for all this time. So we started using it. But there comes the problem. Spine is a completely different entity. The way I explain it is that spine surgery was never meant to be a subspecialty of orthopedic surgery. There is nothing in orthopedic surgery that's going to make you a better spine surgeon. For example, the concept of rigid fixation works well in extremity because of one important fact. You can eliminate gravity. You can put the patient in, of course, sling, or in the lower extremity, you can put them on crutches and basically take the gravity off. You can't do that in spine. You cannot hold the patient, suspend him in the air for 3 months at a time. So what we need a completely different set of instruments, what I call reactive rigid fixation. For example, when you build a high rise in San Francisco, an earthquake zone, you don't make it stiff, you make it flexible. So when there is a stress, it can flex and it can dissipate. I'm not saying like a noodle that's just hanging out, no. But when there's like a earthquake, it flexes and it dissipates that energy as opposed to cut out and break and crack and everything else. So that's the concept. So what I'm saying is that it's like Newtonian physics and quantum physics. If you want to build a house, you can use Newtonian physics. But if you want to build laser or shoot a spacecraft to space, you need to use a totally new principles called quantum physics. And that's where we went wrong. We applied our knowledge that we learned in orthopedic surgery, we applied that knowledge to spine surgery because we'd learned with that. And then when the research came back and said this doesn't work, we looked the other way because we were convinced that's how we should do things. And that's the problem.
Yeah, humans don't like change. I mean, you got so many things here for me to unpack. You said something that really caught me. We were talking about MRIs earlier, and you said, even in 1995, MRIs weren't that great. It was kind of grainy, and they weren't amazing. But this guy published a paper in 1993 saying that these were. So how was he? This is where my scientific brain goes. Well, how are you basing the validity of? These are amazing, instruments. So my first stance would be like, you have no proof of that. You're just speculating. And then when you start to follow the money, and this is where it blows my mind, is like most people don't have my background in clinical data research and medicine and all those things. The average person doesn't know how to do any of this, Doc. They don't know how to follow the money. They don't know how, like they would look at that paper that was never finished. I mean, use the word paper and in quotation marks, it wasn't even really a clinical study because it never came to fruition. But the average person doesn't know that. Right.
What you discussed, there are two separate topics. I'm going to talk to both of them. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that paper. Well, that paper at that time, they had CT scan and X-rays. He said that he used that, because to look for fusion, actually, the better device is a CT scan. MRI looks for cartilage. But this is the situation. Now, I have talked to a lot of lawyers. in terms of what I can say, what I cannot say.
Smart.
I cannot accuse somebody of something, but I can say what is, what I believe in. So nothing about that paper makes sense. His results was so good. I mean, so good that it was almost perfect. And nobody can duplicate that, even close to that. So that's one thing.
Well, you and I both know medicine is never perfect, right? I don't care who you are or what, where your education's from. It is an imperfect science.
I mean, that results of that paper was so perfect that's almost comical.
Right.
Now, now there's another thing. This gentleman, Dr. Zadeblik, finished his training in 1989, the summer of 1989. So he did his fellowship somewhere in Midwest, and then he moved to Wisconsin. He is the chairman of, right now, he's the chairman of spine surgery in the University of Wisconsin. So in 1989, he moved. So it's not like he stayed somewhere that he was and then continued. No, he went to a completely new place to set up his practice. Guess what? Let's go back from 1993. If you publish a paper in 1993, you can't just publish it and just publish it right there. No, it should go through peer review. And even if something goes through peer review, and that takes about 6 months or so, even when something goes through peer review and you submit it to the article, it doesn't get published the next issue. They tell you, hey, it's 6 months from now or 8 months from now. So let's say 6 months. So it took, even went for the past, very fast pace. Let's say got published in 1993, and then let's say at the end of 1992, everything was done. Well, you have to have follow-up with the patient. So if the last patient was followed for a year, that brings you to 1991. That means studying the first year and a half of his practice, the first 2 years of his practice, he published the most important paper. He didn't have time. There's no way.
Right.
The first 2 years of my practice, I was lost. I mean, so nothing about that paper makes sense at all. And of course, so this is what's going on in the world of spine surgery. All the papers say it doesn't work. The only thing that says it works is by somebody that didn't finish the study.
Right.
Then he got paid from the company a good chunk, and then he gets caught by United States Senate cheating on that on the subsequent paper. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, that's just, I thought about for 3 years, am I doing the right thing with writing the book? Am I doing the right thing? I mean, for 3 years, I couldn't sleep at nights. I'm like, I'm opening the old wounds, very deep wounds. Am I doing the right thing? And it always comes down to the same conclusion, that there was a reason that they went through the trauma in 1990s. And we didn't solve the problem. We just threw it under the carpet. And that's it. Yeah. So, but it's a very important concept I need to explain to the viewers and listeners that they need to understand. My argument doesn't say that the spine surgery doesn't work. All the research says that the fusion surgery, what we do to the patient, does work. People who get the fusion, they do better as opposed to not getting the fusion once they have exhausted all the non-operative care. Except that the research says that we don't have to make that surgery as expensive as it is. So a cheaper surgery is as good as the expensive surgery. That's the concept that so for all the money that, healthcare is spending, they're not getting anything in return, basically. That's what the concept is. It's not that the spine surgery is crap. No, spine surgery works, but we just don't have to make it so expensive. Well,
is this the correlation where because I spent a lot of time in hospitals as a pharmaceutical rep, and then you also have device reps, right? Surgical reps and surgical companies, like, you mentioned a couple of them earlier. This is where the synergy of that comes in, right? Like where the money, where the rubber meets the road, because you have to ask yourself, like, why is a representative of a medical device company present in a surgery that you're having, right? Like, I mean, what's the correlation there?
no, that actually is not a bad thing. I
Right.
actually like that a lot. Why?
But
I tell you
explain
why.
that. Yeah, explain like what's the value of that? Because it almost feels like, is it because that company wants them there, or does the doctor want them there? Like, what's the correlation?
No, doctor definitely wants it there. And as a matter of fact, it's a great asset. As a matter of fact, sometimes we can't do the surgery if the rep is not there. Why? I'll explain to you. Because these screws, they come up with like 6, 7 different trays. There are all these equipment to, it's a carpentry basically.
Right.
Imagine when the carpentry does carpentry, they have all these instruments. Well, those nurses, when we do surgery, it's me, possibly assistant. I don't do my surgery with the assistant, but let's say there's an assistant, but there's a scrub nurse that hands you the instrument. Well, those scrub nurse, they're not trained in what equipment is in what tray.
Gotcha.
So to get the surgery smooth and fast, the rep, he sees what I'm doing. He said, okay, this is what you need. Okay, that's what you need. And now you can get this, And, but there's another thing. Some of these reps, well, now there are two different kind of reps. One is that, just green and young, they don't know much. But the rep, for example, that I use has been doing this for 20, 30 years. So I tell people, I said, having that rep in the room is like having 20 other surgeons in the room.
Yeah, they've seen thousands of surgeries.
Exactly. So when I get into trouble or when I'm having a question, they can read the x-ray so well. They can read the MRI so well. So sometimes when I'm putting the screw, I'm like, well, I can't see it. And he just reads that x-ray so well. And I'm like, okay. And so what I'm saying is that, so having a rep in the surgery actually is a good thing, that's not what I'm arguing about. But of course, those reps are, they will do anything to get your business. They become your friend. They'll take you, here, they take you there and all that stuff. And I always get up in conference and they say, they're not your friend.
Right. Yeah, that's what I always thought was bizarre in the pharmaceutical world is like, I had an American Express card with an unlimited expense account. Like I could buy whatever I want for whoever I wanted to get them to do whatever it was I wanted them to do. And that in and of itself, you follow the money, and there's a lot of money being exchanged in order to get somebody to do a certain thing. So I think where you stand is that you have a very ethical, belief system. And so you're going to do what's right for the patient.
Yeah, let me explain to you what is happening, basically. This is what is happening. A company comes up with a product. And let's not talk about where does it come with a product. Yeah. Let's say that company comes up with a product. Well, that CEO of that company is not a doctor. And he has only one goal and one goal only, to make money for that company. Yeah. That's it. And he will do whatever it takes to meet that goal. So what's going to happen is that they approach a surgeon. A surgeon might say, you know what, I don't want to work with you guys, but they will eventually find somebody that will write paper. And most of the time it's somebody famous. They don't go somebody, they're not going to find me in a small town, they're going to find somebody who is in an institution that has a big name, Harvard, Johns Hopkins or so. So they find somebody that is attached to a big name, and that guy starts writing papers that are favorable to that product. And we all start using it. Then 10 years later, we find out the product didn't work. Nobody says anything. It just moves on to the next product. Well, and I'm like, wait a minute, come back here. What is that thing that you wrote? By the way, where's that CEO? Well, that CEO has retired. He's in south of France with, $80 million or so, the retirement package or whatever. Doesn't even care. He's gone. Well, I'm like, no, come back here. What did you do here? Because this is the situation. People say, oh, wow, there are a lot of victims that they receive these unnecessary surgery. I'm like, no, you don't understand. The victims are much, much, much more broad. Why? Because every time you do this thing that you publish papers that are kind of bogus, you steering the entire world of spine surgery in a wrong direction.
Right.
So the victims are not just the people who received that product. So this has to stop. Now, what I'm saying is that, now, let me show you something, okay? I brought this, I want to show.
Yeah.
It's not just me saying this. This is our spine journal. This is what we use. Like whatever the articles get published in this, we read it and we know what it is. So one day I walked into my office. This is a journal from issue November 1st, 2020. So November 1st, 2020, Spine Journal. Look at the lead article. I'm reading the lead article here. Undisclosed conflict of interest is prevalent in spine literature. This is our journal.
Right.
Is telling us that the data is tainted. Our journal. So it's not just me.
Right.
It's our journal saying it, and nobody's doing anything about it. It's just the power that instrument company. Let me explain to you. Dr. Zdeblik did all of this, right? But we don't know true extent of what he's done. Why? Because from early 2000s till late 1917, 18 thing, he was the chief editor of a major spine journal. Never in the history of medicine, a company has had such a direct access to literature. I mean, that's just so what he did as a chief editor in the science of spine surgery is unknown. It's crazy.
That's mind-blowing.
Right, and of course, I go to spine surgeons, the leaders of the field, very famous guys, and I tell them that, and this is what their answer is: yes, we know that we haven't been able to show with research that screws work, but we know they do, and we'll show it in the future. And I'm like, wait a minute. Every time you fail to show that something works, you've just shown that it didn't work.
Right.
These are not two separate events.
Right.
These are not two separate. This is the same event. When you fail to show that it worked, you just showed that it didn't work. So we've shown very solid data that it doesn't work. So you're telling me that you want to do experiments over and over and over, and you're hoping that one of these will have the results that you like? That's complete definition of insanity.
Absolutely.
To do the same experiment over and over and over and expect a different result. That's what we're dealing with right now.
So let me ask you a final question. I think this will help everybody just tremendously. From a doctor's perspective, if I needed any procedure, whatever it might be, how should a patient approach their medical interactions with with doctors, with hospitals, with the establishment in and of itself? Like, how should we get as much information as we can? Because most people, don't have the time, the resources, don't even know where to start. What should a patient do before they engage in, obviously, find a doctor they believe in, trust in, all those things, but what's some first steps you would take if you were on the other side?
Oh my God, you're asking such a difficult question.
Well, I know it is. I know it's a big question, but just, what would you do? Like if you were one of your family members needed to have a procedure, would you just allow your wife to go to a doctor and the doctor said, hey, we're getting surgery tomorrow?
Well, the one thing, I want to say something, but I got to say something else first.
Please, yeah, the floor is yours.
Right. First thing is that the question that you asked is so multifactorial,
right? I know.
Because everybody's so different and every surgeon is different.
Right.
I mean, you don't know when you go to a surgeon what's his priorities.
Right.
He might be looking to buy a Lamborghini. I don't know. I mean, we are humans. People who live in certain cities, I don't want to say which ones, they're used to seeing Lamborghinis and Ferraris on the streets all the time, and that's what they want to buy. I don't know. Maybe that's what their gig is, So I don't know from surgeon to surgeon what their, priorities in life. But we are humans. We are, even though we are being put on pedestal, and we deserve that because we do good work, But still, within us, there's a very,
there's a hierarchy, right?
Right. So that's one thing. Two, if you really want to ask if a surgeon is good or not, ask the operating room staff, the nurses that they circulate. Mm-hmm. They will tell you who is good and who's not. They know. So if you can, it's very hard for the patient to do that. But if you have somehow access to, you call the operating room and say, hey, can I talk to one of the nurses that are in the hospital? Can I just talk to them for 2 seconds? If you can accomplish that and say, hey, who do you think is a good surgeon? Because they know what doctor, how many complications they have. They see that patients keep coming back to the OR, or how long does it take, or, they have to call health or something like that. So that's the inside information that I can give the people. Other than that, I tell you, it's so difficult because spine surgery is like carpentry. I explain to the patient that the spine is a mechanical device. So it's really carpentry. Yeah. So you either born with it, or you have a difficulty grasping it. So it's not like, oh, this guy went to Stanford and went to Harvard, and oh my God, he's like, it's not like, computer science that you go to these very prestigious, or being a writer, you can go to these prestigious things and being a not very good surgeon. Yeah. So it's very difficult to judge that way. I'm the first one to tell you. I mean, I did my training at Harvard, but I'm the first one to tell you that it's really that personal handcrafty, the technique, the what do they call it? The fine tuning, dexterity of your hands. That what makes you a better spine surgeon. So that's one thing that I wanted people to understand. Two, first, this is what I tell people. The big question is like the big question that I asked is, do you believe in chiropractic care or physical therapy? I like chiropractic care before the surgery because they can manipulate and they have, but the physical therapists, they can't manipulate. They have to put the patient in range of motion. And putting the patient in range of motion with a disc problem that are hurting is very difficult to do. So I rather chiropractic care that they do manipulations and they can achieve what they want to achieve, which is basically decompressing the area. So I like chiropractic care before surgery. After the surgery, I like physical therapists more because they do, range of motion. They're more gentle with the patient, let them start walking and increase activities or so. But one thing I want the patients to understand is that it's very difficult to ask a specialty what they think of other. For example, patients they like their chiropractor. They're gonna say, hey, what do you think of surgery? Or they might go to a surgeon and say, hey, what do you think of chiropractic care? That's the worst thing to do. Why? I tell you a story. I was in San Francisco and I was visiting one of my friends who's a radiologist. As I was leaving, he said, oh, my wife, something about my wife. I'm like, what about your wife? And his wife said, oh, I have a bad disc. I look at the MRI. I'm like, oh my God, you have a very large disc at 4.5. What have you tried? She's tried everything. And she said, I can't live like that. I'm like, I think surgery can help you. And my friend said, no way. I am not going to let her have surgery under any conditions. I'm like, why? Because all day as a radiologist, I see X-rays, CT scan, MRI, failed back surgery, failed back surgery, failed back. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You only get that part. If the patient does surgery and do well, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that. So all day you see that just segment that they didn't do well. So what I'm trying to say, and then it's like it just turned on the light bulb in my head. I was like, oh my God.
That's a great perspective.
Right. So people who have surgery and they didn't get better, they go back to chiropractor. People who had surgery got better, why would they go back to chiropractor? So at every specialist, you see people who have the other therapy modality and they didn't get better. So it's not a very good, way of asking because let me tell you this, I have a lot of chiropractor friends. I tell them that I have to protect, I have to defend chiropractors in front of my surgeon friends because they think chiropractic care doesn't work. Now, but this is the reverse is true too. I have to defend surgery with my chiropractor friends because they think surgery doesn't work.
So you're saying we've got quite the conundrum on our hands, Doc. Like we
Right.
need to do as much research as we can, get as much info as we can.
Right.
I want to
But the
commend
most,
you, yeah, for being brave enough to step out and be a voice for, I mean, what I consider to be a voice for the patient, which I think is amazing and awesome.
I have to. Once I found this out, I couldn't live with myself. I'm like, I can't see. My wife is like, didn't want me to write this book. She's like, you're going to ruin your career and ruin your practice. I'm like, if that's what's going to happen, so be it. I'm not going to regret it. But this is something that I have to do. Once I find this out, I can't sit, still, because my mind is always about solving problems. So when I see a problem, I solve the problem, and I have a solution for it.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Just sit around and not do anything?
Well, I can tell you on the contrary, if I ever have a back issue, guess who's getting a phone call? You. Because I understand. I want a guy like you who's going to, have my best interest at heart and who really cares about his industry and what he's doing and all of those things. And so kudos for being brave enough to write the book. Corporate Spine, you guys will be available in the show notes everywhere. You can go to Amazon, grab that. I'll put all the Doc's information on there. Doc, what would you say as we kind of wrap up? I mean, is there anything you want the audience to know or about you or about the situation, about anything before we head out?
Well, a couple of things, I guess, let's say, well, who's this guy? Dr. Aslie, what is he talking about? Who's he? One thing that I think it makes me very different, and I've thought about this for years, am I different than the rest of the people? Am I, thinking, what's going on? I think one thing that makes me special is that I always assume that I could be wrong. That's something that some of the surgeons, I think it's hard for them or something like that. Yeah. I don't know the answer. And I always, when my patients come and ask me, hey, what is it? It's like, this is what I tell them. I said, this is a situation that retrospectively, after the surgery, we can come up and say, we did the wrong surgery. But right now, as we sit, based on the information that I have, that's my best answer for you. So that's one thing that I just don't see it in my colleagues. I mean, they just don't want to assume that they could be wrong. It's just crazy, that's one thing. Two, the future is bright. The future, we have answers. We have, we've used an ancient device, a screw. Screw's been here for like how long? We've used an ancient device in our surgery so far. But now we have technology. We have those straps that I use, we didn't have it 10 years ago. They're stronger than same size steel cable. They call it Dyneema. Right. We use Dyneema for a lot of things now. So we have 3D printing. We have laser drilling. The device that I invented wasn't available, or we couldn't do it 10 years ago. So what I'm saying is that the technology is improving, and in the future, we will have appropriate devices to immobilize the spine, leading to better surgeries. So future is bright. Don't get,
I love that.
Right.
I'm an eternal optimist, so I love that. I love what you said earlier too. I have a mantra that I live by, and it's always confident, sometimes wrong. And I'm willing to, and when I'm wrong, I'm willing to say, hey, I was wrong about this based on the information I have. And I also say this, like I reserve the right to change my mind based on new information that I'm able to gather and receive. And I think you're saying the same thing, but I love your optimistic outlook on the industry and on medicine and on everything as a whole. Like it's a bright future, and technology hopefully will lead us to a better place. Right.
Just give us some time.
Yeah, listen, I think everything takes time, right? But I think with your belief system and your passion, like I'm confident, and I feel good about the future of spine surgery and just medicine as a whole, knowing that there's people out there like you that are willing to stand up and have the patient, be the priority, which I think is pretty cool.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining me today, Doc. Thanks for spending, all your valuable time with me. And I can just want to wish you continued success and awesomeness. I think you're a great dude, and I feel honored to have spent this time with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity for me. So I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome. All right, guys, that's it for the show today. We'll be back next week with another episode. Doc, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey, before you go, I'd just like to say thank you again for listening to the Thrive Forever Fit podcast and watching on YouTube. It means the absolute world to me. And if you would do me one favor, and that is simply subscribe and review this podcast on whatever platform it is that you enjoy it on, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, doesn't matter. I would absolutely be so grateful and so thankful if you do that for me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you again next week with an awesome episode. Bye.